I'm glad I waited to write this book. It took me years to understand how the Ceely Rose case wasn't merely the story of one family's self-destruction. It was the story of an entire society that had trouble figuring out what to do with an outsider. It's an issue we still have today. I wish I could say I were confident that we'd do a better job dealing with Ceely Rose today. Often, I doubt we'd even do as well as the people of Pleasant Valley did 125 years ago. I parked the car in front of the Pleasant Valley Lutheran Church, the same church where Ceely Rose confessed to her friend that she had murdered her family. As I walked toward the Rose family graves in the cemetery across the road, I became aware of the peripheral names in the story spread out around me. Here were Ceely's defenders, the Ohlers, the neighbors, the Berries, Flora Schrack, who wrote an eyewitness account, and even Guy Berry, the object of Ceely's obsession. In death, he lies only a dozen yards from the family whom Ceely Rose poisoned, thinking this would clear her path to her true love. Instead, Ceely herself lies buried more than 100 miles away in the patient cemetery of the Lima State Hospital. The resonance of these stories was palpable. My own involvement with this case goes back to 1982, when I was 12 years old. That Halloween, my mother, knowing my already well-developed taste for the macabre, pointed out an article in the newspaper. It was a typical Associated Press filler article, something originally created as a news release by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources about alleged hauntings in state parks. I was surprised to find that the bulk of the article was devoted to a local legend, Ceely Rose, who had poisoned her entire family in 1896 in a small farmhouse still on the grounds of Malabar Farm State Park, where I had once gone on a school field trip. This fascinated me and became the motivation for future visits to the park, where I took tours and learned more about the case. For a number of years, I forgot about Ceely Rose. I grew up and became very involved in regional theater as an actor, writer, and director. In 1994, I was working in the office of a scrapyard run by my uncle, because theater in rural Ohio sure as hell won't pay the bills. When I took a lunch break and stopped by the bookstore in the nearby mall, I found a book titled Haunted Ohio by Chris Woodyard. Suffice it to say that little work got done that afternoon in the office when I discovered that the first section of the second chapter of her book was devoted to the Ceely Rose murders. Woodyard had plunged into the archives to consult some of the original media coverage of the case, bringing it to life in my mind's eye. I got chills not just because of the spooky story, but because I immediately knew that it was going to be my next play. That summer, while working as an assistant stage manager on a production of South Pacific, directed by Larry Evans at the Renaissance Theater in Mansfield, I plunged into research. I spent my free hours in the John Sherman History Room at the Mansfield-Richland County Public Library, pestering reference librarian Boyd Adelsberger for help with the cranky microfilm machines. My research assistant, my 12-year-old niece Michelle, and I poured through old newspapers for hours on end, turning up tremendous amounts of long-forgotten information. I spent a lot of money ordering records from the National Archives and making trips to the places involved in the story. Wrapped up in these source materials, I wrote my first draft of the play in less than a week. I later revised the script and submitted it to a new play competition held by the Ohio Theater Alliance, where it won an honorable mention. Then, not knowing what to do with it and unable to find any Mansfield community theaters willing to produce a new full-length work, I sat on the script for a few years. My friend and theater technical director Daniel J. Feiertag insisted that the play had to be produced, so I finally contacted Malabar Farm State Park, asked if it could be presented there, and found an eager collaborator in park manager Louis Andrus. By doing it as a co-production between the Malabar Farm Foundation and the Mansfield Playhouse, with community support from the Richland County Foundation, we were able to finally bring Ceely to life in 2003. The first production presented in the very barn at Malabar Farm that contains beams from the original grist mill
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.